So today we're talking about the pelvis. I believe the pelvis is a gyro. You know, does everybody A, know what a gyro is? If not, I'm going to be explaining it. I bought my cat video. So it's much more familiar with mechanics. An airplane, my husband actually used to make them, and they're in a box. And every airplane has a gyro on them. And that's what talks to the navigational system. So as the airplane tilts and does whatever, the gyro compensates into where you are located on the earth. And so it always knows exactly where the plane's at. So that's how the plane talks to the airports, the satellites, to whatever, back to the pilot. I believe we had the same thing. We are taught the core, the six-pack abs and all of that. If babies were born with six-pack abs, that's called cerebral palsy. I mean, we are little Buddhas. If you look at old yogis and all of that, they have a actually I can't even do it. The old yogis had this protruding belly, and they literally can suck their stomach in and play with it out. I mean, that's a real New Jersey version of it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, but they have a control over their system that's just inconceivable to most. And now that we've gotten into this, I have to be thin and always with the abs and all of this, we're really learning that degree, or missing on that degree of movement. Because even when I have an abs like this and they're really tight, for me to go up and over, I'm already contradicting the movement because I'm going in here, or I see it with karate when the abs are this way, especially like if they're doing a round kick. So if you're actually coming around and doing a kick coming around this way, my gyro, my center is going in this kind of movement direction. So if I then were to engage my abs, I'm now going in this. So this is where the torque's going into the extreme, and it's going to cancel out because I can't go to kick and the abs. It's going to throw off my whole rotation of the pelvis and then the force of my kick, so I won't have, the force coming out through my foot. And that's what I'm talking about here. So most people are familiar with movement much more so with inanimate objects. So I have a towel here. I can move it any way I want, and now when I have it this way too, I can, everyone gets snapped by a towel when they whip them. The one thing too that's pretty consistent, as long as gravity doesn't win, with movement of an object, I can take my force and put it through an object quite consistent. But as you can see, the towel faded, the gravity took over because my force wasn't great enough. So this towel is totally moving until gravity wins. Once gravity wins on an object, it's done. This towel is not going to jump back up into my hands. There's no movement properties because I'm not initiating the movement. So, and that goes back to, everyone loves coming into doing this. Now this object was made by a machine. So every ball is put in place by a machine. So there's no human error involved. So no matter what, I'm going to get a force of movement until gravity wins. Gravity will eventually be too much for these balls to maintain their energy source, and they'll stop and they'll go together and just fade. And that's just the way life is. But, so in a car though, a car now has gears. The movement is still technically limited. I can go left and right. I can't fly a car. I can crash it really well, but that's much more human error. But a car really can go forwards, backwards, left, right. It can't do circles, it can't fly, it can't. And the car, when it runs out of power, cannot restart on its own unless a human being either puts gas in it or turns the key or whatever. So any kind of thing that has prolonged amount of movements, it's a very consistent movement, like a conveyor belt or whatever, doesn't have these random movements. Even a wild thing, a roller coaster, you're still dealing with a very simple movement. Yes, there's a lot more force involved, and you have to have, so people don't fall out of it, but it's not really the torque of the equipment. It's going in a very consistent manner and using very basic principles of physics but it goes at certain speeds faster than you and I can go at, so we really enjoy it. Or we really hate them, but I enjoy it. So I was mentioning yesterday, seeing this for a cat. Most people, I thought, realize that when you have a cat, they always fall on their feet. You should be familiar with that. Are you familiar with that? The cat falls on. So with that, see if I got hook up here, but oh, here it helps if I hit play. I think it's trying to find my Wi-Fi first, but there we go. See how a cat just settles, and they do it from all different angles. Now most people think that that's an inner ear thing, but you can really see the gyro working here. So does that make more sense? So they're doing that. He arches his back, and they're doing it so, again, I call it just fundamental learning. But what my whole discussion is here is when you're working with somebody and working with yourself, the force, the movement patterns goes through the system. And even if I'm in sedation with a coma, my system is still moving. My heart is functioning, I'm breathing. My system's down to a very low grade, but there's movement in the brain and there's movement in basic organs. But no matter what, as long as I'm alive, whether you're sitting here and he's fixing his hair or doing whatever, there's movement going on with our cells all the time. So even 5 minutes from now, you're not the same person as you were 5 minutes ago. I'm not saying you're smarter, but you're not the same person. Because you've moved into a period of life that you haven't experienced before, and that's what that whole system is. So when you actually work on someone and take that into consideration, so when some people see that I'm just maybe touching the toe, yes, physically I might be just touching the toe, but I'm touching the system. So I'm touching the toe in a sense that, and I'm just exaggerating my body, so when I talk about when I'm working on the heel, but I'm actually working into the hip joint, that I can touch through the foot and bringing up through, so there are changes or different organization that happens the way this hip now is organizing itself to this foot. So now I can do it just by the way I'm standing and do it with myself and do variation and play with my foot patterns. So now if I did this for 15 minutes, I would automatically walk differently because now my brain would have a different relationship with this foot than it would with this foot because I haven't played with this foot. So, and also what happens as we get to adults, we get more of this left side, right side. And you hear it all the time, this, are you a left brain person or a right brain person? Who cares? The whole brain has to work together. You might have organizations that have happened here that or I might have organizations that I react to based on the experience here, but at the exact same moment, I'm also reacting to situations I've learned over here or up here or down. I mean, the skull is so much more complex by that because it's not one part talking to the other. It's all these parts talking to one another. And then where you see where people have problems or trauma is some of these connections either disappear for a moment or they start to, and that's where you have to come in and to rewire. So I don't look at it being difficult to a person saying, or trying to force these synapses to come back. I have no problem to saying, okay, so what about trying in here? Why can't we do it here? Because we're not cars. I'm not stuck with the wire going either in port A or port B. If I don't hot wire my car right, I'm going to smoke the battery. There are very basic principles to the stuff that we use that we can fry out an object in 2 seconds flat. It's very hard to fry out a human being. We'll test ourselves and we'll change ourselves, but it's actually very hard to kill a human other than blunt force trauma. And if you don't believe me, I don't know, go to Walmart. You see people just in conditions that they're surviving in that's normal to them. And that's what I look at. Why is this normal? Why is this, but at the same time, I more look at just the function of movement. So I'm very familiar with the basic principles. So for every action, there's a reaction. So if I touch you, there better be a response back. And if there isn't, and it's much more so, worst case scenario, near drownings, because the way that the brain's been traumatized, it's different than, let's say, being born in that condition, even with oxygen deprivation at birth. It's still a different response because that baby got movement right away, so the brain wasn't set up, versus having a trauma later in life. And I sit there sometimes with near drownings, just touching, going, where are you? Where are you? Because I'm looking for, like your son just responded, that the way I touch a person, that I understand where they're at that moment. And so I'm looking for that tonus response, the response from the bone. That there's a lot of little things. I really go back to like what a dolphin feels. And when I touch in, I get a response back. It's not ping, the obvious stuff, but there's a give and take. Most of us only have that with conversation. We don't have that experience with touch. So going back to the pelvis, with all the movements here, I have all these extremities that go into the pelvis. So what I'm going to be talking about today is not only how the pelvis functions or can increase functions, but see, even watch this. So if I do this pelvis thing, and again, this is just a funky little whatever, but I'm just trying to show that as my pelvis moves, my ankles are moving, my toes are moving, my hands are moving, or this kind of thing. Now I can stand here with all fours and do my pelvis. It certainly won't look like Shakira. When she goes, her whole, I can't even do it, but her whole system gets into it, and that, or Cirque du Soleil, or all of this, and that's what's so fascinating. They have the same body parts, but boy, they can move a hell of a lot differently than I do. But then again, I haven't practiced those moves. It is not my goal in life to do 15 hula hoops. I enjoy watching it, and I visualize myself doing laundry as I'm sitting there doing about 15 of these hula hoops, the way they just sit there and go in and out, but I'm not practicing. So, but at the same time, when you work on someone, that might be their life goal, and that's okay. So that's another thing to consider when you touch. It's not about me, and it's not about you, and sometimes it's not even about that person, because that person doesn't even know what they're capable of. But to see a person's potential and just say, hey, but if you did this, and that's why I'll say a lot, oh, notice how your heels suddenly went like this. Well, you can get now in and out of a car. Because getting in and out of a car, my heel rotates and pushes me out. That energy, that movement comes all the way through. Now also, and that's another point that I want to talk about movement, as my foot does this, now let's say I did break my leg once, so I have that scar tissue there. I might have a new hip, so I have that new hip, scar tissue, blah, blah, blah here. I might have been hit really bad or had a car accident where, my rib cage is here. So that's where human movement is totally different than I call it, or artificial movement, or movement of an object. Because as I go now to move here, that movement now is now going through my leg differently than anybody else in the world. Not only because I broke the leg here, but because of the hip placement and because of the way my rib cage is organized. So now so what if I hold my breath right here? Now I get stuck. And this is where people talk about the energies or whatever, but it's more the movement. It's just not, because it's not going through what I call the gyro correctly, and through the ankles and all of this. Whether it's a pinky, a knee, or whatever, every body part affects the system, period, the end. Even if you can't see it. That's another thing. Like psoriasis, people go, oh, my skin. And I'm like, what are your intestines doing? What if it's on your heart? I mean, how is it affecting your system? I'm not saying you're going to have psoriasis of the heart, but I mean, how does that allergic response affect the rest of the system? It's got to increase inflammation. It's got to increase the way that organ functions. It just, in my mind, it just has to, or why not? Versus it can't. So I'm just more open to possibilities. And even a bad thing to me is a possibility versus someone going, oh, you're a goner. So, especially when someone says you will never be able, I have arthritis, you can't help me. That to me is like, yeah, come to my dinner. So, because I like a challenge. If someone comes to me again, much more as I'm their masseuse, I don't engage the same way, and I won't, because that learning opportunity is not there. But they're not looking to. They're looking to relax, but they don't see the overall how their whole system can improve. But again, I have to back off, because who am I to say, maybe after a couple of lessons, all of a sudden they will wake up and go, hey, wait a minute, this is much more than, and then, and that's just me being human. But I like the real hardcore cases more so than, but the other stuff to me is quite easy. So, first of all, any questions? Is this real basic stuff? I mean, you guys all assumed it before?
Yeah, I get it.
I just want
It's
another
not basic,
angle.
it's just, I understand it.
Right, I know. I just wanted another angle to realize when you're touching something.
Mhm.
We're so used to just real basic cause and effect responses
Mhm.
versus that cause and effect. And also what happens here, you might not even see it. Because 3 days later, someone might go, hey, I suddenly can do such and such, and I had no idea.
Mhm.
And I'm like, cool. Or they might not even realize, or it might take a couple of weeks. Or I had a kid that was no longer afraid of his closet anymore, but she's like, well, you didn't do anything to help that, but why did it happen? And I'm like, but I did, because he had more options of how he would respond to life, and he decided that he was no longer afraid of monsters in his closet. Now, I'm not saying I had the monster technique down and all this sort of stuff that I did. I pushed a specific button, and that's where people get confused too. Now, I might at times hit a quote trigger point, never studied them, I have no idea what they do. Maybe it would bring me to a different level, but I only touch in a way that I'm looking for that cause and effect, and how that my touch is allowing that system to move. And again, it's not making that system move, it's how my touch is allowing the system to move. And to touch in a way that now that person doesn't know, am I moving? And people comment on that, like, I don't know if I'm helping you or not, because they can't tell if they're actually willing this hip to move or I'm doing the work, because it's just so in sync. And that's just time and practice and just a different level of doing it. So with that, I'm going to put Enrique on the table, just because he only gets me for a whole couple of days, and you guys have me all the time. I'm going to do a lesson very similar I did to you with the visceral manipulation. So it's the only thing I really don't do that has to do with the bones, or it's the visceral tissue. Claudia had one of the best lessons of her day when I did that. She left here like, oh my God. She was Shakira for a day. But I really want to show just the organization of just a different way to approach the pelvis, but also this is the clearest way to approach the pelvis that you're then going to affect the extremities immediately. So.
Is that why you start with the pelvis and work with the baby?
No. This was an interesting thing that I had a Skype call with a woman from Australia. I always go back to the vestibular, breathing, and heart function. If your balance is off, that's key. There's a big difference between going out here and working versus, again, even on my own self, to secure the hand and then to work this way with the fingers, because my brain's going, I don't have to do anything with this hand. Michelle can just do it. I'm there, I'm secure, I've got the hand. So what happens, what should happen with all people, is the subtlety, and this is where I'm going to get into the pelvis, the subtleties of counterbalance. So a baby is like this. And then what a baby will start doing is feet up, they stretch them, and then they just fall. And they stretch them, and they fall. But if the right arm reacts, the left very subtly will counterbalance. So as they go like this, A child that's having problems will go right, and they fall, or left. Now I'm not saying a child can never fall because they learn from good for bad. I don't want it to be like, oh, my kid just did this. So, and then as a counterbalance gets more complex, I can do all of this and eventually roll over and not fall off and do all of that. So, and then once that's happened, then I counter, and I can sit up. So when a child first comes to me, I have to make sure that that system is operating at the best I can get it in the short amount of time, which is an hour, but I have to make sure that that system is working, whether the child's in sitting, lying down, whether it's a grown adult or whatever. That's if I know there's been trauma to the system, I go after that because, again, this is your gyro, this is your home. This is where I believe balance is from. Yes, your inner ear has something to do with it, especially when your inner ear has crystals, then it'll affect your balance. But to say that I just sat up because of what went on with my inner ear versus what went on with my pelvis, I'll go with the pelvis. Because if that pelvis isn't organized, how am I going to come over my system? So one of the things that I commented to with this mom is, okay, let's say the child's here. The child just goes, and you saw it with David, flops forward. Mm-hmm. And so this is where most physiotherapists start looking at, well, we have to increase the upper body strength to get out in this position. They're looking at the hand strength. But what it is a vestibular is so shot. So if I lean over myself, I don't have to go like a baby into overprotective responses because I already know that my vestibular is at a sophistication that I can reach over, grab this object, and just play with it. I'm sitting upright, I'm holding my head. That's great. But when the vestibular is whatever, this is where people blame at low tone or this because all of a sudden the system's like this. And then they're like this. And then they'll say like they did with my son, oh he's just stimming. And I would just have to just be adamant. He is so weak. He wants to play. He just can't. This is all he can do to muster play. And they go, no, it's a stim. And I'm like, because his skeletal system wasn't functioning, and that's why I started doing this work, because what people were saying about how my child was operating just to me wasn't logical. I didn't know what the hell I had to do. It just wasn't logical. When they said he shouldn't be walking, but he is, be grateful. But he is walking, why can't he walk better? That I still go back to those lines that just blow me away because it just didn't make sense. Why can't you do something better? You should have an exceptional life and so should that person. So again, to make sure the vestibular is okay. So even when we're lying on our sides, and this is where people come of age, a person of age starts to roll over and now they got to fix their pillow just in this position, even though they still have to get over here. It's like, and now they're wide awake at 2 o'clock in the morning and they say, I can't sleep. They can't sleep because they can't function and just to roll over like this in the middle of the night and just keep sleeping. It just should be a natural event. But when it becomes a life effort, your life starts to change. Now you're not getting sleep, you can't do things, and your body will start declining just because of the way you roll over in bed. Which again sounds so simple, but those to me are it's the simple things that people take for granted and don't understand the complexity of how it's now affecting your life long term.